Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
As for our keynote this morning, I'm in keeping with really the emerging topics. That's what, yesterday we had Paul Watson, and he was talking about Carmen and cloud computing. Today's opening keynote is actually going to be talking about the area of e-humanities. And while this isn't necessarily emerging so much, I would say it is emerging, but not in its absolute infancy. It is something that has not traditionally in our workshop had a lot of airtime. And so what I'd like to do is introduce that topic to us. I discovered just actually 2 weeks ago, I was visiting with one of my advisors on my PhD thesis, Terry Langadoon, that he knows Peter. And so I guess there's just 1 degree of separation between us. What he had done is he actually, Terry is a program officer at CyberInfrastructure, actually at NSF right now. And he had invited Terry many years ago, actually, to give a talk at Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics back in the days before he was actually at NSF, and he was a professor. And Peter actually now is the technical director of the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics. Peter has a background both in electrical engineering and computer science. And I personally know him through his work for artificial neural networks for modeling speech, something that is very near to my own thesis work. He also is involved in defining standards and working on interoperability between ontologies, which is something I consider extremely important. So it is my great pleasure today to introduce to you Peter Wittenberg, and he's going to be talking to us today on digital repositories, archiving, and infrastructure. Peter?
Thank you, Christine. Hello, good morning. So, Christine already introduced myself. So I'm from the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics, which is in Nijmegen. And those of you who don't know Europe so well, it's at the corner where the Rhine crosses the border from Germany to Netherlands. Well, thanks to the organizers to invite me to present our ideas, our works at this eScience conference. I come from an institute, as you may know, that is dedicated to fundamental research in a variety of fields. Our own institute deals with the question of how our brain processes languages and how we acquire languages. So we are part of the humanities. Let me put this at the very beginning. In the Max Planck Society, there are about 80 institutes, and in average, they have 4 directors, scientific directors, so you can imagine that in general, we have about 300 scientific directors. These are the guys who are under an enormous pressure to do first-rate research, as you can imagine. Being myself a member of the Central IT Council of the Max Planck Society and having launched an eScience seminar series 2 years ago, I made a small inquiry recently about what these scientific directors, think about eScience. And before I start with my talk, I would briefly give you an impression what the idea is. What these directors think about eScience. The reaction was very heterogeneous, as you can imagine, since the first question they all ask is, does it help me to get the Nobel Prize? So what is the gain for my research? And then you will see, for many of them, eScience is just another label for the advanced stuff they have to do anyhow to be competitive. There are only few others who see the potential for an even more computationally oriented research paradigm. And of course, some see the potential to raise new funds, which is also very important. So let me see how you will classify what I have to say, what we are doing in the humanities discipline, and whether what I will tell you, show you, fits with your picture of eScience. I don't know. I don't have any sensational story, but just a report about some hard work. So, I got a new device from Microsoft. If something doesn't work with my talk, it's fault of Microsoft, I would say. Okay, so the essential question for me and my group is, which tools can we build to improve linguists' efficiency for the different tasks in their daily work, in their research work? Which infrastructures can we build that allow linguists to focus on their research work and not deal with data handling and so forth? How can we preserve the data about languages and the knowledge about them for future generations? I will talk a little bit more about this, since for many of you this might be new. And we create a product. We will not compete with Microsoft here, but we are tool builders, and I will only touch certain things briefly, but I put some of this PR material for those who are interested outside at the Microsoft desk. It's about our tools which we build. It's about the work on endangered languages, which I will report briefly. It's about research infrastructure in Europe in our domain, and it's about some work which we do together with ISO, the International Standardization Organization, about data concept registries, and that's where I know Terry from as well. Okay, so let's see. A little bit about languages, since I guess for most of you this is new. So we have at this moment, depends on how you count, between 6,000 and 7,000 languages all over the world. And you see it's an uneven distribution. And every 2 weeks, on average, one of these languages dying, which is awful, of course, since we lose a lot of treasure of mankind. And if you look to the statistics, you will see that about 69% of the languages spoken are only spoken by 3% of the people. So you can imagine how dangerous the situation for many of the languages are. And of course we know that all our languages are getting mixed. We lose structure, we lose identity, nothing new for all of us. And we have to see how we can deal with these problems. Well, so that's this characterization of the situation with languages is part of our motivation of our work. That's what I will try to explain as well. So, major workflow change. Being myself someone who did digital signal processing some decades ago, I know that, of course, dealing with speech or video on computers is nothing new. So when I started 30 years ago, we, for example, developed pitch detectors, so trying to identify the height of the tones which we produce. For observational linguists, and those are these people who go to the field site, documenting all these languages, trying to preserve the knowledge about these languages for future generations, and of course for research work. For these observational languages, linguists, this was not at all common. So what they did is they made recordings on separate carriers, tapes, cassettes, what have you, and they transcribed them then, and the original material went into the cellar. Actually, then the annotations which were created were the basis of all future work. They were treated as truth, and as we all know, that's not true, since it's heavy loaded. All these annotations are heavy loaded by linguistic theory. And the fact was that almost no one accessed the carriers anymore. So no one went back to the original data. Now, due to some technology innovation, things changed completely. From the 90s, all the material was digitized at the Max Planck Institute, including gesture material, sign language material. And from 95 about, we had the first multimedia, multimodal annotation tools to help the researchers in their daily research work. And as you can guess, at that time, 95, we got very much skepticism about the new technology. People were so used to use small video equipment. So there was a lot of skepticism to take over. And then you can see that certain things happened around 98, 2000. So the people started really to believe in it, that we can offer a persistent service for a huge amount of digital data, which is important, right, to get this research work done. So they relied on our services. And also in that time, we could improve our annotation tools so that people really could do something on their notebook. So around 98, 2000, we systematically digitized and captured everything which we have, also went back to old material. And that's what you can see in the terabytes curve. So for humanities, 45 terabytes is a lot. I know for plasma physics people that's nothing, but in the humanities this is a lot. And as you can see, we have an increase of about 12 terabyte, which in our archive, and that's a challenge for us to maintain this. The data is different to, for example, what the plasma physics people or other people do. We have a lot of semantics there, a lot of relations between all the resources, and the structure is very different. So for us, of course, not terabytes count only, but it's the complexity which is in the data. So we have about 60,000 sessions. You could call sessions a linguistic unit, an interview, or what have you. And we have about 300,000 objects in the archive, as I said, with very complex relations amongst them and very different content. What were the facilitators? Of course, the reduction in cost. That's not new. And as I already mentioned, the possibility to offer a persistent institutional repository. But as I already indicated, what was also very important was that we had improved tools so that people could work with videos, could make the annotations, and based on generic schemas, as we call them, so everyone is free to choose his vocabulary, which is very important since no linguists don't agree with each other. How to use, Chrissy knows that, how to call certain tiers, annotation tiers, how to use certain encodings for their linguistic phenomena. So that was one of the one of the points which got a momentum, and of course the other one was that we kind of invented, if you want, a metadata infrastructure based on a schema, of course, so that we could classify all our resources so that we have come to an organized archive. This was the same time when the Dublin Core people, for example, started intensive discussion or did intensive discussions on Dublin Core. So we created this IMDI metadata set in very big, strong discussions, extensive discussions with our researchers. This is just a screenshot for this tool, ELAN. I think it's now one of the most widely used tools for doing this kind of annotations. You see the different components, and everyone, as I said, everyone of the researchers, the wrong button, can create his own or her own set of tiers. Tiers are these annotation layers. So you see here, there is some phonetic or orthographic transcription, there is some morphosyntax decomposition, some phonetic description, and so forth. So everyone is free to choose his own set of tiers, and everyone is free to choose his own encoding scheme or variables, vocabulary along those tiers, which is very important. And as I said, this is just another few screenshots. We created this catalog so people can access all our resources via internet or via internet methods. This is just a screenshot from our catalog, and of course that's not sensational. Wait a moment. And of course they can do a search on the whole archive if you want, or select a certain metadata on base of metadata criteria. They can do some searches on resources and then do a content search, and then you will get to some hits, and then you directly can play the video, the annotated video if you want. So this is something which really was taken up by our researchers. And of course we did our game. Of course we provide an OAI PMI pipe for those people who want to harvest our metadata. Well, so that's what we started doing around 95 and which we improved in around 2000. There is something which I should mention, which is the Dobis program, which was founded 2000 by the Volkswagen Foundation. It was about documenting all these languages which I spoke about, and to really get a good idea how these languages are structured, what kind of treasures the words of the language encode, and write this down and preserve this for future generations, and of course allow people to do current research on this. So as you see, it's a worldwide distributed activity. There are currently 45 teams all around the world documenting about 60 languages, and we became the central archive. So all these teams work independent of each other. There's just one agreement that whatever they create in data, a copy has to go into our archive so that it's available. Well, if you do this kind of work, you know that the data which is recorded cannot be reproduced. Languages are going extinct, and you have to take care that you do something with respect to preservation. And as we know, you can't almost give guarantees, but you try to do your best. So, of course, we all know that our storage media have limited lifespans, so we have to do something to overcome the shortcomings here. And just to tell you, UNESCO recently did an overview about the situation of all the different material which is out there, and 80% of the material, cassettes, tapes, recordings about languages and cultures, is endangered. So it's not only that the cultures and languages are endangered, it's that the material is endangered. And we know for just logistic reasons that only a small fraction of these 80% of cassettes which are out there can be turned over to new technology so that we can deal with them. So we will lose certainly a large fraction of these recordings. And of course, if we go to the digital domain or computerized domain, still there's a question, what can we do? Well, the answers are very boring, as you all know. You can only copy and migrate technology. Of course, that's not the only problem. The other problem is that our standards for encoding and structuring of resources come and go. You just can take the video domain as an obvious example. So within a decade or two, we have a whole range of different encoding schemes, now ending up with Motion JPEG 2000 as probably lossless as the choice for storing video or preserving video information. And why is Motion JPEG 2000 so important? The reason is that the big film industry here in Hollywood decided to go for Motion JPEG 2000. So for us, that's a good point to also do this. But of course, we have to take care that we maintain interpretability. Oh, that's a difficult English word. Make it interpretable over the next decades as well. So we have to take care that all these old formats are transformed to new formats then. So digital archives are in a continuous change and migration at various levels. And of course, this is a nightmare for traditional archivists, but we have to cope with these phenomena. Well, what do we do at the level of bitstream preservation? As you can see, we have 6 copies at large computer centers and 2 at ours. So we do a lot, full copies dynamically taken, but that's not the only story. We increasingly often we create, together with our friends, overall in the world, we create what we call the regional archives, and we deposit or exchange data with them about the languages which are recorded in their regional area. So we do a lot in preservation at bitstream level, which is important. since you never know which copies will survive. Of course, what is very important is that for the material we have religious ceremonies, lots of faces, intimate stuff, that everything we do here is based on proper and fair agreements. At the curation level, so when we go away from the bitstream, then we are faced with much more difficult problems, as you can imagine. Of course, we are happy that Unicode is there. Of course, as I said, we are happy that now a scheme, Motion JPEG 2000, is kind of accepted by the big players. So it's good to go the same way and create lossless media encoding schemes. Why is lossless media encoding scheme so important? Well, you may have heard about the concatenation effect. So if you have if you digitize something according to a certain encoding schema and you transform this, you can have these very strange effects which disturb your material. So you need a mother format from which you can then create the different preservation formats. And as we now believe, Motion JPEG 2000 could fulfill this job. Of course, XML is accepted as a structuring language for text, but XML is not enough. Of course, we need schemas, and here we now are busy to create what we call generic schemas. So this annotation tool, which I showed you a moment ago, is based on something called ARF, whatever it means. It's a kind of generic schema. I wouldn't like to call it generic schema since it doesn't have the ISO brand or another brand of an international organization standardization. But together with other linguists, we are working on something called linguistic annotation framework, which is meant to be a generic schema to provide to cater for all kinds of text, also structured annotations, for example. We already finished another standard, which is about which is called lexical markup framework, and it's kind of a framework which allows you to play Lego games for lexica. If you look to two lexica from linguists, they're all different in structure and encoding. And of course, for us as technologists, it's impossible to deal with all these variations. So we needed a kind of Lego game, and lexical markup framework is exactly that what we needed. So we have built one tool based on this lexical or supporting this lexical markup framework, and of course now we are able to handle all the different varieties of lexica and just have one tool to cater for all of them, to show them via the web and so forth. So in the Dobis program, which I introduced a moment ago, we are bound to do our formatting, at least in the archive, according to such open standards. And we apply in the Dobis project an immediate transformation policy. What does that mean? If we get something in Word, horrible, but that's what we often get, then we try to, then we have to do a curation step to get this into one of these nice structures, schemas, schema-based structures. So that's what we do immediately in Dobis. That costs a lot of time and money, as you can imagine. Of course, you have to store the old formats as well, since all transformations can be lossy, you never know. And of course, there are some sub-communities working with other tools which are based on these legacy formats. What we know is that only if your archive is coherent with respect to format and if it's consistent, of course, then you have easy access. People have easy access to the material, and then you can easily do transformations in future. I just heard from Bigri a report he made in the UK. It's a colleague from the UK. They did a lot in their eScience program. They did an overview, and he found out that for metadata, only for metadata, the curation costs are a factor higher, 30 times higher, if you wait with creating good formats, for example, 10 years. So the costs really increase if you don't do the transformation to some good structures as early as possible. Here are some metadata facts which show you that we are not there. We still have to convince our researchers. So we made an overview about 27,000 metadata records, and as you can see, we looked at how much the different fields are filled, and you can see the situation is not that good. If you only look at the language name of a language, you find 100%. But the name of a language is not at all standardized. So people could use something like X for denoting German or so. So it's not standardized. So it doesn't allow you to search on this material. Of course, what we would like to see is that the people use the content language ID, which is taken from a controlled vocabulary, which we at this moment we get from our friends from SIL. But then you see that only 40% are using this language ID, which is unique for various reasons. There's a lot of debate, of course, on the correctness of these labels and so forth. And, of course, it takes time to look it up, what the correct ID is. And if you look to fields which are more difficult to handle, like genre, where linguists can debate for years whether a certain vocabulary is correct or not, then you will see that the degree of filling is very lousy. So you can search at this moment on a genre in a nice way in the archive, which is, of course, very bad. So we see that our researchers are not at all committed. If we speak about standards, if we speak about high quality metadata, for example, we still have a hard time to convince the researchers to take time for this. And of course, there's no pressure at this moment from funding organization and there's no funds more often in research projects to do this kind of stuff. So after a decade now, we first have see that there's, or we can tell the researchers that there are some benefits to create high quality metadata. And that holds for other, for the usage of other standards as well. So now they see that they have a large archive, that they can use good metadata for their research work. So just have a research question like, what is the usage of syntactic forms by children at different age? Well, you can do this now on the whole archive, but of course you have to have high quality metadata. You have to have some identification of how old the speakers are. So you have to invest time to make all these marks. And of course, it depends on the quality of the syntactic annotation in the resources itself. But at least this is one point where our users, our researchers now see that the creation of high quality metadata is useful for them. Here's another example. This is from a Beaver community, a nice website created by the Beaver community. This is a group of Indians, Native Americans in Canada. And they wanted to create a special portal, a nice portal, of course, and then by clicking on one of these buttons, get all the resources which belong to this category. So if you want to do this, of course, you have, for example, to fill in the genre field, which I just reported to be filled in very badly. Now we have the first time that our researchers understand that they have to adhere to our advice and fill in the genre in their metadata records so that they can do these kind of queries on the fly. And as you know, if you create static links, after 5 years or so, nothing will work anymore. So you have to go via high quality metadata to get if you want to get movies, to get all the recordings which are in which have to do with which are, for example, where it's clear from the metadata that these are video recordings. So here are 2 points where we now see that our researchers understand that it makes sense to invest more time to adhere to our recommendations. In this case, create good metadata. Okay, what is also important if you want to maintain archives in the research world is that archives are attractive. And then you have to offer ways that researchers can add material to the archive, since otherwise static archives are not interesting for research. Research is about adding, enriching, correcting, things like this. So therefore, we focused in my group on various ways to allow people to enrich the data which is in there, in the archive. And of course, enriching can mean a lot of different things, like adding new resources or annotation layers, uploading new versions. Of course, if you do this, you need a persistent identifier solution. Commenting on resources, drawing relation between the different resources. Also in this respect, you have to set up a system for persistent identifiers, as you can imagine. And this is now our tool suite which we created, which supports all these different phases. As you can see here, we have some tools which allow you to prepare data so that they are adhering to some standards, best practices. Here's the catalog stuff. We have a gatekeeper tool that takes care that users can add data to the archive, but in a controlled way. So we check on formats, do things like this. This is the archive. You can, of course, use the catalog and geographic information system to browse through the data. And you see you can look at complex resource types like annotated media. And we are now busy with tools that allow to create new types of visualizations of our data. I will come to this in a moment. So just you can do this if you use the browser or Google Earth. In this time, you see here there is a small island, Russell Island, close to New Guinea. If you go there, you will find this overlay for Google Earth, and you can do this kind of thing which I show here, briefly indicated. So you can jump to the catalog entry. You can start looking at the multimedia lexicon. You can look at annotated videos or audios, or you can access photos, things like this. And as I indicated already, we are now busy to create a tool which allows people to develop a tool which allows people to create what we call conceptual spaces. In fact, what we create is nothing else than different views on archived material, semantic views, genealogical view, if you want, things like this. So best I show you a screenshot about this so that you get the idea what we are talking about. Of course, these things are much more interesting especially for language community people than a boring catalog. So this is the tool. It's still in operation. You would first select one or two or three lexica. So it's lexical based. You select some character to get an inventory of the head words which are in the lexicon. If you make a selection, you get some more information about the lexical entry. You can then create easily relations between different lexical entries. You can define your own relation types if you want. And then you can draw something into the conceptual space, knowledge base, and then things look like this, hopefully now much better than this. So you create a semantic navigation space, if you want, where you now can operate. And for example, if you click on one of these nodes, you get immediately access to the information which you like to see, like lexical information, or it could also be a video, what have you. So what has been achieved in our work at Max Planck and Dobis during the last decade, if you want? We have a large archive with equal access to primary and derived material, which is very important. So people can now look in a theory-neutral way at the data. We give access, neutral and atomic access to the resources. So nothing is in the archive, nothing is pre-assembled in a certain way, biased way. What also happened is that our people now, our researchers, agree now that they handle over data, a copy of the data, in an explicit way. This was quite a change for them, since normally an annotation or lexicon is never ready, right? So they now understand that they have to give us unfinished material. That was a huge step. So researchers learned, I like to say this, to act just as software developers, give you stuff which is not without errors. That was a hard time to convince them. Of course, what we also achieved is lots of awareness about formats and the needs of and benefits of good metadata, the benefits to use proper tools and things like this. And of course, we had lots of discussion about rights and ethical aspects. I will not go into this. So as I said, there is a change in scientific culture in our domain and of work paradigms due to the work in this last decade. That's something which we can see at the Max Planck Institute and in this Dobis realm. And of course, some technical advancements which I showed you. Well, does this all cost something? Recently, we had a meeting from a board which is called Alliance for Permanent Access in Europe. It's a large political initiative, and I was asked to give some numbers. And of course, this might be interesting. It depends on how you do this, but to maintain a 45 terabyte archive in our domain would cost you kind of 80,000 if you, depending on the type of technology, if you have an innovation cycle every 4 years or 8 years, 8 years for a tape robot, for example. If you do all this copying to big computer centers, as you can see, it's a very small number. You may want to have, you need some system management activity to keep control of the storage system and other aspects. You will have an archive management to do all this creation, to give advice. And if you count this, you end up with about 200,000 euros per year. Well, if you want to also maintain software which allows you to handle all this data, so the gatekeeper software, and to add new data in a nice way, and if you also want to maintain software which allows you to make access in the way I showed you, then you probably need a little bit more. So maintaining a large and complex archive, living archive as we have it, costs you some money, but it may not be ignored. And of course, as you can see here, there is an economy of scale. So this, making the copies, which are at this moment really backup copies at the big computer centers, just costs a little bit of money. But of course, if you do this, then you do not have any information about the data which is in the archive. There's no curation and things like this. And as you can see, this really costs the amount of money. Well, this is completely in line with what I think these are the people who give the Oscars, right, in Hollywood. So there's a report from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And it's called The Digital Dilemma. And what they also report is that maintaining a digital master file, so they even don't talk about living archives, maintaining digital master file costs you 12 times as much as storing an old type of film roll. So this is all in line. Digital archiving, especially if you have a living archive, costs you some money. Is something missing? Yes, of course. Just a few simple questions. Can a researcher now, having all this nice whole archive, a useful content search on the whole archive? No, the answer is no, since you have all these differences in encodings and the semantics of the text sets, for example. That still remains. Can a researcher easily use a certain lexicon when operating on text? No, for the same reason. Things don't fit together. Can a researcher easily align a piece of text with a speech signal? There are aligners, based on stochastic algorithms. But can they use it? No, they can't use it. They are somewhere in the expert lab. Can a researcher combine Trumai? Trumai is a language spoken in Amazonias area. Can a researcher combine Trumai data from MPI and say ILA in Austin, colleagues in Austin? No, they can't, since there are also all the different repository systems there's no integration layer yet, and so forth. Can we easily integrate catalogs? Well, that's a little bit more easy, but still we are not there. So there are lots of points which our researchers still not can do. And here I always like to cite Henry Thompson. Hope you know Henry Thompson. He is one of the fathers of XML. He said recently, except for XML and Unicode, we don't have an agreed descriptive system in linguistics domain. Yes. Now I will use my last minutes to inform you. So that was Max Planck and Dobis project, our archive. And now we'll turn over to a research infrastructure project, which we started almost a year ago on paper. Some of you know the European Commission always takes a little bit more time. So actually we started in June this year. So it's a huge infrastructure project in Europe to overcome all these problems which I just said. And recently we addressed the same issues in the Clarion realm in this way. And as you will see, it has a relation to our Christmas time now in a moment. So our language data resources in a good state. Well, in German we have an expression called Jein. You don't know whether it's yes or no. So I put it in English here. I don't know whether this is something you know. And believe me, I know where I'm talking about. I'm touring around now around in Europe, visiting the different centers and seeing what's really out there. Are language resources visible for researchers? So is there good metadata? Do we have a joint catalog? No. The answer is very clear. Are language resources accessible by researchers? The answer is even worse. So I put another O there. Can language resources be combined to virtual collections? No. Can you execute an operation on a virtual collection? No, even more zeros. This is about data, and now you will see. So you can ask the same questions with respect to tools. Yeah, do they fit together? And you see the result is a Christmas tree. Normally I like them, but in this case, of course, we are not so happy with Christmas trees. So the situation is really awful, one has to say. So still, if a researcher wants to do all these nice kinds of work, then he has to overcome a lot of hurdles. So what is very clear is we have to get all the resources and all the technology, the tools out there, out of the expert labs and make them available. Of course, when you look at resources and tools, you get a whole variety of different things. I will not go into detail here. So what is now Clarion? What is it about? As I said, we want to overcome all these different sources of fragmentation in our domain and give better services to all the researchers who work with language material of different sort. So we'll want to tackle all the problems which I just mentioned. And as you can see here, we have now about 144 of the strongest center or institutions in Europe in our area. They all participate, which is good. And you can imagine it's a fully distributed approach with 3 layers of responsibility at various aspects. So we have a European umbrella, there's a national responsibility, and of course we are looking for institutions that can take part of this big game. Let me just briefly tell you that it's not just paper, that there's some real money involved. So we got a 3 years project from the European Commission for something they call preparatory phase, so 3 years, and we got 4.1 million euros. But much more important is that we now convince the countries in Europe that they also add money here. And you see here, if I just sum up what we get from Germany, Finland, Netherlands, France, Denmark, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Spain, and what have you, you now come to 20 million of euros, which is really substantial. I think at this moment it's the biggest investment in the humanities area. And I hope, of course, that we can do something real good for the community. But that's what we have to show. And of course, what we are aiming at is that we get commitments from governments or funding organizations that whatever we do now gets a stable research infrastructure. since researchers are not interested in a project outcome, which is, which disappears after 3 years or 2 years. No, they are interested in stable infrastructures where they can rely on services, also in 10 years. Since if they could not rely, it would cost them a lot of time to learn again and again new stuff. And that's what they definitely do not want to do. If you look to, it's all open on the web, if you look to the dimensions of work in Clarion, you will see, of course, that there are 2 major dimensions. So we need first to understand all the characteristics of our resource world and the tool world. That's a lot of work. We have to understand the structures, see how they are encoded, how the linguistic phenomena are encoded, and so forth. And of course, we need to implement the integration into interoperability, which we are aiming at. There are a few other dimensions which are as important. We need to collaborate and interact with the social science and the humanities, firstly, since they are the researchers that work with language data and would like to use language tools. So we have to collaborate and interact with them to see what are their needs. We need to simplify and harmonize all the legal stuff, the IPR issues, licensing issues. We know this. Just imagine if a researcher would like to make a virtual collection and from a number of centers, and he or she would have first to read hundreds of license agreement stuff and sign different things and things like this. It would not work. So we have to come to very simple schemes here. And of course, we need to find an organizational model for if we get persistent funding, an organizational model for this kind of operation. And of course, we need to do a lot of awareness building, education, things like this. And if you look at the work package structure of Clarion, you will find that we have the structure, and we are responsible for the implementation part, so for the integration, interoperability stuff. At first, so there are some pillars in Clarion which we are tackling. I just only look at the technical side. First, we need to identify the stable centers. What are the centers in the different countries that really can take part in this game, that really can make a commitment to offer certain services over a longer period of time? That's not at all clear who can participate here. As I said, I'm touring now around in Europe and just identifying, seeing what the state is of different institutions and trying to find out what the gaps are. And of course, if we have centers, we have to convince people, researchers, to give them material and tools to the centers. And that will only work if we come to centers of new type. Often centers have an idea to have, what do you call this in good English? Create their own business, establish bureaucratic hurdles. If we would do this, we'll forget about this. We need to come to a new business models, a new ethics of running such a center. This is about, I should make this short, this is about the integration part. So what we are aiming at is have the Clarion service providers just act as a big publisher, if you want. So we have different national identity federations coming up in Europe. There are trust agreements, and what we are aiming at is that these different identity federations, say that's the German one, that they make just one agreement with Clarion, and then all the people, all the researchers who are registered in this national identity federation, I hope you understand, or you know what I mean with it, that they are immediately part of the game. So the researchers don't have to deal with many of these bureaucratic things, and this is the way then to implement a single identity and single sign-on possibility. I have this diagram, and those of you who are more technically oriented, they immediately understand what I'm talking about. So you have some middleware like Shibboleth. There are actually, at this moment, there are two, Shibboleth and Simple SAML SL, so it's very overseeable. And with help of component at the resource provider side and some help via distributed authentication, you finally can imagine that there's a researcher who easily can pull resources from different institutions into one basket and then work on this virtual collection. Another very important pillar is, of course, persistent identifiers. I just have two examples here. Of course, people want, from some document, want to refer to a video or a lexical item. That should be possible. The question is always, how long does a reference hold? If you use URLs, of course, we all know that's not good. Officially, I'm not allowed to speak about URLs anymore, but actually we all do that. So there, of course, here's another example, and that example is very interesting. So here you see a screenshot from this concept registry. Yeah, from this concept registry. And of course, people, to achieve semantic interoperability, you want to enforce people to link from their schemas to different entries in the concept registry. And if you know that two point to the same entry there, you know that's the same concept, so you can provide information for your search engine and other. So PID system is, of course, very important. I'll skip this. We have set up something, and it will be offered for the research community in Europe. And we do this together with our colleagues here in Virginia, CNRI. So we use the Handle system. Of course, we want to establish what you could call a virtual language resource and technology observatory. We stole this term from the astronomers. So an open marketplace for all the resources and tools. This is not at all easy, and we know that we have to go away from fixed schemas to a more component type of approach. We'll not go into detail here, and of course we have it much more difficult than our astronomers. I guess, Tony, you had a virtual observatory on your notebook, wasn't it? And of course, what they like is they have a radial coordinate system, some wavelength information, so some parameters. We don't have that, believe it. Here again, you can cite Henry Thompson. We don't have this clear, or this so clear coordinate systems and metrics along these coordinates. It's more difficult, but we have done a lot in the last decade, so there is something like a component framework from the Text Encoding Initiative and so forth. So we are hopeful that we'll go ahead here. The last, of course, you need to, there was a nice workshop at the NSF workshop in New Hampshire last year, and one of the main questions is, are we already in the cyber infrastructure domain? Are people working in this? And of course, you can understand that the answer was a big no again. And why is this so? Since what people normally do, researchers, they first look at something, download the stuff to their notebook, if they're allowed to, and collect all the stuff on the notebook, and then start working, converting, doing this. And of course, what we want is go there, that you start a web application, and then under the motor cap, I think that's the English expression, some services interact with each other. Well, that's not at all trivial, as you can imagine, and we are far away from a solution. But we want to do steps in this line, along this line. So, sum up, where are we now? We are doing an online inventory of all language resources and technology components in Europe. There's a huge participation since we asked for only few fields. We have to extend this to hierarchical metadata, and that will need money for this, since we can't ask the researchers. They will not accept to do all this, provide all this information, so we have to hire student assistants and what have you. We are busy with doing a self-assessment to identify the strong institutes in Europe and to identify the gaps to come to this network of centers. And of course, we'll do a lot of talks and bring together the Grid Federation people with the linguists. We specified the requirements for a service provider federation, so to get the integration done. So we kind of solved already the PID system problem. There's a service. People can use other services as well. We're talking with the people working on this distributed authentication and authorization infrastructure. So that will be something which we will set up very quickly. We are busy
specifying the requirements of a component metadata infrastructure, and we're quite optimistic there. What is good is that this ISO concept registry, it's existing, so we can use it, make use of it, and we are discussing the requirements for web service and workflow systems. Well, we are not alone. There are a lot of initiatives at different layers, which with help we can interact. That's of course very good. Very important is that we have these standardization people, text encoding initiative, and this group ISO TC37, especially subgroup SC4, and a couple of other initiatives in the social sciences and humanities. And here's something which you may know in US, the Bamboo Project from Chicago, I guess. Well, that's my last slide. I still have problems to understand what I want to say with this slide, but I leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, before I turn it over to the floor for questions, I do want to do a little bit of an advertisement. Dr. Wittenberg is actually conducting his own, he's chairing his own workshop here in conjunction with the IEEE conference. And I believe it's on Thursday, is it not? It's on Thursday that you're... oh, it's tomorrow, okay. So on Wednesday, there'll be an eHumanities workshop taking place in conjunction with IEEE. Are there any questions from the floor? If there are, could you just come down to the to the podium?
This is a very interesting talk. I'm interested in the evolution of controlled vocabularies. So you said that one of your challenges was reaching a consensus on standards. But standards may also evolve so that you'd have versions of controlled metadata notations. Are you considering that in your infrastructure? And how?
That's a good point. I guess you refer to this work in ISO, right? So this ISO group is working on what we call the ISO data category registry. So it's a concept registry. It's a flat registry of concepts. There's no relations involved on purpose, since we know that already agreeing on definitions of concepts is already difficult enough. There will be, when we say we want to establish one ISO concept registry, we are not so naive to believe that this is the whole story. So we see this as emerging as a kind of reference concept registry. The software which we created together with ISO is made such that you can create your or set up your own registry of concept. And of course what we then hope is that people refer to the reference concepts. That's one part of the answer. The other answer is the ISOCAT model. The ISOCAT model is accepted by the ISO boards now, and of course it has a mechanism to take care of changes in the vocabulary and definitions, right? So we don't know yet how this will evolve. That's for sure, but we would be happy if we would first have a reference system, and then let's see how this will evolve. So it's very new.
Okay, we're actually at the break time, but I'm hoping you will take just one more question from me. And we've had a lot of discussion during this workshop, in particular at the panel that we had yesterday, where we had a series of different disciplines sitting up here, from genetics to physics and ecology. One of the big things that has come up consistently throughout this has been user interface design, getting people to actually adopt the technologies. And it seems to some degree that you've overcome this. Any comments that you'd like to make on that, or ways in which you've actually managed to handle that particular problem?
Yes, well, this is a painful story. I would like to have so much money as Microsoft has, but we don't have. So it's a very painful story for my group. For example, I showed you this, briefly showed you this ELAN tool, and there's a lexicon tool, Lexos, which implements this LMF, this lexical markup framework. And I think it's now the third version of the interface which we are creating. The problem which we are facing is, and that's of course for the big players very well known, is people tell us, well, there's a lot of functionality in these tools. So Lexos first allows, this lexicon tool first allows you to create your own schema, which is what people want. So you add some bit of possibilities, options. Then of course they want to do the different things with the lexicon. And so if you sum it all up, the functionality gets complex, the sum of the functionality. And you have to present it somehow at the user interface. Now when you then present your tool to the researchers, they say, oh, that's too complex, I can't use that. Then you start a discussion where you say, well, tell me what the simple interface is. And of course you get 100 linguists, you get 100 different interfaces. So what do you do with this? There's no answer, as you know. But you try to understand, how to hide complexity here and there. And you also suffer from the tool. So first we used, it's all web-based tools, so you have to use something which you can use on your notebook. And first we started up with JavaScript, which is a nightmare on different browsers. Then we started with the Ajax tool framework, and that was also a nightmare, since the complexity of our user interface, these tool frameworks are not so far that they can really do the job. Now we turned over to Flex. You see, it's a painful operation, really. There's no answer what a simple user interface is. Researchers want that. But if you then answer, if you create a limited user interface and you offer it and say, but I miss now this function, where is that? So it's a nightmare. No answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank our speaker again.